Erik Huddleston on our podcast. And Erik, I met at IFAST, and he's the head coach there, the high coach, as I call it once in a while. And he's the straw that stirs the drink over there. So, Erik, tell us a little bit about what you do before we get into exactly what you do.
Right. Yeah. So, like you said, I've been at IFAST for about, I think I'm going on 4 years now. I took over once Ty Terrell left. So, kind of lead our internship program, do most of the evening coaching. So, I see somewhere between 60 and 80 athletes in a given week. So I do most of that stuff for us, most of our like athletic development. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the educational piece. So I lead some of our staff in services, and that's pretty concise version of what I do on a day-to-day.
I watched it pretty much, and from being around there. And it's kind of interesting how you've evolved from where you started, as a basketball, pretty much.
Yeah.
But it would be fair to say basketball only to now, or, in college basketball, that's your background, I would say, to, now you're dealing with everybody from middle school kids to pro guys.
Right.
Kind of tell us, because I think your journey is interesting, how you evolved your thinking and things like that.
Right. So I think the biggest thing for me in terms of the post kind of college education experience was, I think my first internship right out of school was IFAST, and so I got I feel like I had a good base of understanding based on the things that I learned there and the time that I spent, and I think that it was important for me at that time to kind of learn the private sector side of things. I think, as probably both of you know, talking to people is kind of a cornerstone of the business model in terms of like private coaching. So being able to kind of communicate with people, learn how to talk to people and not be just crazy awkward with everybody. And then also, kind of how to form relationships and how to build connections and kind of influence people in that way. So I think it was good that I kind of got my feet wet in this industry through the private sector, and obviously through, crazy, brilliant minds at IFAST. But my next steps from that point, because I kind of knew that I wanted to be on the team sport side, was to do some stuff in college basketball. So I was fortunate to go to Texas Tech with the basketball team down in Lubbock, Texas, and then at IU here in Bloomington. So I was really fortunate to get those opportunities, basically based on connections that I had with people at IFAST in the long run. But I feel like there's a little bit less of the develop who you are as a coach in the college side, and it's more of let's kind of get guys in and out and make sure that we're behind the scenes taking care of things. So I would definitely say that my roots in the private sector kind of accelerated my track to where I'm at now. But going from working in just a single revenue sport to working with everybody from every sport is a huge jump. I went from watching 17 guys every day practice and lift weights and really get to know how they move, to watching 25 people a day, and I don't get to see their sports as often. So in my environment now, working in the evenings, I don't get to go to all their practices, I don't get to go to all their games. I have to really ask them how those things go, and then kind of base my workouts off of that, where in the private or in the college setting, I could go to their practices and see how they did, and I could make more recommendations on what they were doing in the weight room based off of what I was seeing on the court. And now I don't have that same opportunity. So really I rely on the relationship piece with the people that I work with now to kind of tell me the things that they think they need to work on. And then it's a constant reassessment in the training programs that we're doing to kind of establish, are we getting closer to those goals? Are we, are there things that I'm seeing that they're not seeing that could kind of kill a couple birds with one stone and make this process easier? So, that's especially in terms of like the change of direction stuff that we do, being able to not have to break things down into these little individual sections and kind of cover more ground with less, like a minimal effective dose, basically. So that's kind of the major differences between those two settings. People have to like me to come into IFAST. That's the thing. It's like they're choosing to be there, which is a huge benefit to me. I've got people that want to be there. Where in college, you're never guaranteed that anybody actually wants to be in the weight room with you. Basketball is a unique sport too, because those guys don't grow up in the weight room. And so now I'm at a place where, I train, I would say, a majority female high school athletes. I would say that's probably, 40% of my business right now are young high school girls. And so the fact that they are driven enough to make an investment in themselves, like coming to IFAST and spending time and doing that, I feel like I owe that to them to learn about their sports and take their sports seriously. And I think I can talk volleyball now at a at least par level. And I can talk some other sports that I probably had zero experience in, and I watch some of that stuff now that I didn't have to watch before. And so I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed expanding kind of what I do. I wasn't a baseball guy. I have a couple of professional baseball players now that I work with in season. And so I'm constantly watching their games. I'm constantly, seeing the things that they do and trying to, keep up with how their bodies are changing during the season, what things we need to continue working on. And so it's a big piece. I have to spend much more of my time outside of the gym making sure that I'm focusing on each individual person than what I would have had to do when I was in the college setting.
So do you have a template and then you change it as they come in, or do you pretty much follow the template?
I mean, everything is on paper. I have an idealized version of what I'd like to do with everybody based on me watching them for the last 4 weeks of their program cycle. So I have on paper things that I would like for them to do. And both of you know, like, somebody comes in and they've had, a tough practice, or they had a weekend full of AAU games, or whatever it is. That changes pretty frequently. I would say there are very few times within someone's training cycle that the program is executed exactly how it's written. So I have to be really adaptable to that. I think that's something that I really, really learned from Ty, because a lot of the times someone would come in and he could basically make up a new workout on the spot while other people were on the floor and have success with it. And so I think I know the people that I work with now well enough to do that also. And so I like to have something on paper to be a guideline of the things that I still need to get done. But there are a million ways to skin a cat. And as long as I have kind of this expansive toolbox in my head of things that we can do that are going to avoid, someone's knee pain that day, or whatever it is, I can kind of tap into that resource and use that to my advantage. So I think that, on my end, the clients get the most out of it, and I also enjoy the problem solving aspect of all that.
Okay, go ahead, Cole.
Well, Erik, I think what's interesting and what makes some of the stuff you put out unique is that you're not just looking at the variables of like, what is the exercise, how much load is there, and what the velocity is. You're looking at other aspects like the breathing aspect. Where am I placing the load? How much of the motion am I going through? Which portion am I working on? And so an athlete comes in, they have a certain program or a certain template. How are you in your head kind of organizing the progression, regression, taking into account a lot of these variables?
Right. I think it's definitely easier now than it was when I first tried to start doing all of that stuff. But now it is, I have kind of in my head a layout of all the variables that I have control over, and then looking at the person that I'm working with. Okay, what variables make the most sense to alter for that person on that day? So I think load is the easiest one, right? If I just take away load on some stuff, I can increase the speed right off the bat, and then maybe I have more access to ER because I'm not extending their runway of force production. So typically if someone is in pain, it's from kind of over pushing in the same direction. That's the most general way I can say it. So if I can lighten some stuff, if I can band assist some stuff to make sure that they're kind of de-weighting on the way down of an exercise, like a split squat, for example, if I can alter where the load's at, if I can alter their breathing pattern to make it, maybe I need an inhale on the way down rather than a breath hold on the way down. So it just changes day to day. And those are small things that have kind of this big global influence. So I'll never be able to know exactly why changing a small variable works, right? There are a lot of factors that go into that. But it's kind of understanding each person that I work with and saying, okay, on some of the stuff with people that have been with me for a while, there's complicated breathing patterns. There are things that from left to right side, when they do, let's say, a cable row, there's different breathing on different sides. And the way that they're doing that sometimes, depending on the day that they've had, it can bog them down mentally. And so maybe it's just making a small change to get kind of the most benefit out of that exercise rather than frustrating them with a complicated breathing pattern. And so, yeah, I think that understanding all the little variables of control, understanding, the depth that I take them in an exercise versus, whatever you would, consider traditional depth for a squat, for example, whether I seat them on something like that, like those are all little things that make a huge difference. And so someone can read through a program and say, okay, like I know everything that's going on here, until you read the comment section and there's all of these kind of individualized things that I need to have accomplished during that. So the exercises are simple. Like I don't do anything that I think is so wildly out of the box or stupid looking that people can't pick it up pretty quickly. It's just the fact that there's so much attention to detail paid in the way that something is set up for somebody. So I really like to use the constraints to make something where I don't have to say a lot. I'm big on kind of letting the exercise, like setting up the exercise in a way that they're going to be successful versus me having to say everything to them or coach a feeling. That's something that I've tried to get away from as much as possible, to just be quiet and hopefully put enough thought into the exercise selection that it's going to make them successful. I have a lot of kids, and you guys know this, I have a lot of kids that like really, really care about what they do. And so they'll ask me or look for affirmation constantly. Like they're always like, how is that? How is that? And I think I got to a point where I was so tired of hearing how is that, or like having to pat them on the back about everything, that I was like, screw it. Like I'm going to make you successful in this exercise and just not say a word about it. So that was probably the biggest jump for me from, coming to IFAST for the first time to where I'm at now, is just being comfortable with not saying anything about it besides maybe giving them like, nice job on that. We'll always have those conversations about things that we need to tweak. But if I have to say something, I kind of have a rule. If I have to say something or remind you of something 3 times, it's probably not the right choice on my end. And so as long as they know that I'm accountable for that, and we'll make the switch. So I'm not ever married to an exercise. I'm not ever married to the way I have something set up. I just need to understand, what possible outcomes could have by me changing these little things.
So what's your process like in terms of onboarding someone who has no experience in terms of how you train them, and how you get to the point where you can just give them an exercise and they just execute it, and you don't have to have that communication of like, oh, should I have done it this way? Oh, am I feeling this, and this kind of thing?
Right. Yeah, I love that. It is, so we obviously have an assessment process, which is kind of different for everybody. It's table measures and it's performance assessments, and it's having a conversation with them to get to know their goals. So that kind of creates for me this like common language, right? I'm able to give them kind of an exercise vocabulary through that. So we'll talk about a squat position, we'll talk about a hinge, we'll talk about split squats and presses and all that stuff. So they've gone through that by the time they have their first session with me. And once that vocabulary is there, their first program is probably the most general program they'll ever have. So I like to expose them to a lot of stuff. I like to make sure that I cover all of, whatever you consider the big movement patterns, so that I can see, it's kind of an extension of my assessment. I need to see how they move in certain situations. I need to see how they move with load on. I want to see, a lot of times with youth athletes, I want to see, where breakdown is in change of direction stuff. So it's, short-sighted games, or it's really closed circuit cone type stuff. And so, like I said, it's the most general they're ever going to do. The breathing patterns, I don't know that I coach a ton of really specific breathing on someone when they first come in, because more than likely the things that I'm having them do, it's the first time they've ever done those in general. I know that if I start to become like the breathing guy, which I think everybody who comes through IFAST kind of gets tagged with at some point. If I start to become the breathing guy with everybody, they're going to be so bored, and they're going to be so overcoached, and they're going to be so overwhelmed by everything that I'm trying to feed them on the first day. First of all, they don't know me at all, right? Like, they're coming in, I'm trying to crack jokes and like make them not have the worst time of their life. and they're like, okay, so this is something I've never done, a movement I've never been in, a position I've never had set up before. And now you're going to tell me like this really specific breathing on an exercise that I've never done. Like, I can't do that to them. And I probably, like, I forced that early on, forced it. I was like, you are doing this, or, we're just going to have to toss the baby out with the bathwater. Cause like, I wasn't going to let myself not do what I wanted to do. And now it's like, okay, if I want to keep these people around, and I want them to actually see a benefit from what I'm doing, just simplify things. And so that was a big takeaway. And so like they once they get those positions, then I can start to become a little bit more complicated. And typically by the time I've done their first program, it's like, okay, I know how much they can handle in terms of specificity going forward. So that's a big deal, because some people I know are so kind of obsessed with the small details. And so I try to keep their program, I try to dial their programs back. So there's less to think about, and there's less for them to be kind of nitpicky about. But as far as people who are a little bit more relaxed, and like, there are certain kids that just get it. Like, they come in and they have an understanding and a feeling for how movement is supposed to be. And so those kids, I open it up pretty quick. And I'm big on, not holding someone into this goes back to the last point I made, but I'm big on not holding somebody into a program that I've written for 4 weeks. Like, if we should be moving forward, we should be moving forward. They're paying for training to get better at X, Y, or Z. So like, if I'm holding you in a program for 4 weeks, I'm probably doing you a disservice, especially when a lot of my athletes are just off-season athletes. So that's a big deal for me to be able to say, okay, like, maybe 2 weeks of this movement is enough, and we can move on with our lives and start doing, more fun stuff, whatever that is. So yeah, I'd say that's a big piece of onboarding people kind of onto how we train, because it can be really intensive just based on how they respond to that stuff.
What you said that you try to get them to do certain movements, in the weight room. I'm sure squatting is one of them. What are some of the other ones that you find are the foundation for your program that you want them to do?
Right. Squatting's huge. Hinging to some degree is big, and I'm accepting of the fact that hinging might not be a thing for everybody right off the bat at this point. I think early on I probably tried to stick them in that mold also. But hinging is going to be a big one, especially for like, if they're jumping, if they're a jumping sport athlete or a force production athlete. I think that's kind of something that I have to have them do. And a lot of this is also related to what are they doing in school. So what kind of stuff are they going to be expected to do in their school weights program, for class or for sport. And so, I think it kind of breaks down to whatever you would consider the big simple things. It's like squat, hinge, push, pull, and those are, there are vertical and horizontal differences between all of those. I try to expose them to as much unilateral work as I can, because I think a lot of the times if we're looking at asymmetries in terms of like pick a variable, force production, whatever you want to pick, those things become important, especially down the road. So I want to get them comfortable with that kind of stuff early on. So I think if you're looking at it like someone's first program, almost everybody is going to squat. Almost everybody is going to split squat. They're going to have some kind of hinge. Now, whether that's a cable pull through, or whether that's, something tall kneeling on the ground, or whether that's whether I start them with a trap bar deadlift because they've already done that before in the past. I think those things are important. I think that them being able to press or to pull or to push, like all those things kind of make up, okay, it'll either say these are things that we need to work on going forward, or it'll just kind of be a note that I make in the back of my head, like that didn't look great. And so we probably, if school down the line is going to ask them to do that, or their college program, like I'm going through that right now, because all of my athletes that are going to go to college next year have their summer programs now. And a lot of the things that they're going to be asked to do, not just from a movement standpoint, but from an overall volume standpoint, are things that I've never asked them to do before. And so now we are having to key on a lot of those things to say, look, like this might not be the best exercise selection for you right now, but these are going to be things that you're expected to do at the next level. And so we need to work on them now and have a good understanding and help you make the best decision when you're there on your own. And so, yeah, I try to they're going to be doing a little bit of everything. And whether I love, I's, Y's, and T's on a bench or not, if they're going to be asked to do that, I want them to do it in a way that's safe. And I want them to do it in a way that is at least going to give them some benefit. And so I can't avoid all of those things forever. They're going to be asked to do it. And so I have to cover ground on a lot of those things. And so I want them to do it in a smart way.
Good. Go ahead, Corey.
I was just gonna ask, can you briefly explain what a hinge means to you from like a quality standpoint, and what that's training and how that relates to your more dynamic activities, and why you may not program that for someone right away?
Right. So in general, the hinge is we can break this down in a couple ways. It's going to be nutation of the sacrum. It's going to be kind of that forward orientation of a pelvis, or anterior orientation of a pelvis. And kind of they're going to feel posterior chain, whatever that is, and it's going to break down at certain parts of the movement. But that is either going to be a big part of their program or not going to be a huge part of their program, kind of dependent on where they come in. So my athletes that are already in that anterior orientation, in that forward position, posterior compression, whatever you want to call it, they are generally going to spend more time on the flip side of that in like the squatting patterns. I can trust that their sport is going to bring out enough of the hinge qualities that they're going to get that I don't really have to touch on it. I know that as soon as they jump, as soon as they sprint, as soon as they go into whatever force production, modality that they're in, they're likely going to revert to that option. And I'm okay with that. I want to give them options outside of that. And so that's where someone might not start on a program like that with me, because frankly, the kids that I work with spend so much time outside of the gym playing a sport that I don't know how specific I need to be with some of that stuff. There are differences in that too. Like if they're a volleyball player, a lot of their jumps on the court are going to be operational. And so I know that max effort jumping them is something that I might want to do just to make sure that I'm keying on a quality like that. But, kind of moderate effort, low amplitude jumps are something that they do probably 200 times in a practice. If they have a 2-hour practice, a lot of these people have 2-hour practices. So, and I don't know where they get that from, but so they might spend more time trying to, counter nutate their sacrum. They might spend more time trying to have vertical displacement of a pelvis, being able to, I'll call it put the brakes on for a lot of them. So kind of nutation, that forward orientation is going to be a lot of gas. And then I need to have brakes on the other end. So that's where I'm looking for. If you look at Bill's kind of model, I'm looking for an early propulsive position rather than a middle to late propulsive position. So I'm looking for a lot of heel contact. I'm looking for, center of mass to be behind the lead leg, whatever exercise we're looking at, or behind their feet in general. And kind of keying on those qualities to give them some other options, because more than likely, they're going to be either through sport or through, training outside of the gym, they're going to be exposed to a lot of force production modalities. And so I have to be able to say, okay, this is how we accept force on the other end of that. But on the complete flip side of that, I have a lot of athletes that are stuck in, and I say stuck loosely, but they are, stuck in the counter nutated position. So they're low force producers. They're people that, spend a lot of time pushing through the ground with very little force production. And so for them, those are people that I probably start off with more of a hinge, because I think being able to access that and tap into it when they need to do it is going to, give me a benefit in that direction. So those are the people that will see more of the traditional strength training side of things than some of my higher force producers who might need to add a speed element to that. Because I think the thing that we forget in the weight room a lot is like, there is a time constraint to sport. Unless you're looking at power lifting, like there's a time constraint. If it takes me 5 minutes to pick up a max effort deadlift, it takes me 5 minutes to pick up a max effort deadlift. There's not a lot else outside of that in the sport world that doesn't require a time constraint. So I want them to be able to produce as much force in as little time as possible, and try to maximize, whatever strategy that they're using to do that. So that's kind of my job in the long run.
Yeah. So you're talking, a lot of things you do seem to be like for deceleration or deceleration into acceleration, but it seems like there's always a deceleration component. You find, and it seemed like you spend a lot of time just on the deceleration. Am I correct in that?
You are correct in that.
Is that because it seems like a lot of people don't worry about the deceleration. It's all about acceleration. And it would seem to me that if you can't stop, you're going to have a hard time getting going again.
Exactly.
You're get hurt or something.
Yeah, that's basically, so my hierarchy of kind of how I'll lay out an athletic development program, or the qualities that I'm looking for, I guess, are like the first and foremost, like the base layer of my thought process on stuff is, how do they accept force? And so either, like most of the time when I work with somebody for the first time, either they spend too much time in their decelerative moment, so that there's too long of a runway for them to stop themselves in whatever movement that we're talking about. So this could be landing from a jump, or this could be, change of direction work. Either they're spending too much time in that, or they're not spending any time in it at all. And so you guys have seen kids, if we're doing, a sprint to a cone and I have them do a jump stop at the cone, either they start that jump stop super, super early and they're very heel heavy and they never really got themselves going in the acceleration in the first place, or they hit the ground and they continue going forward. So they'll end up on their toes, or they'll stand up tall, like all that stuff. And so 9 times out of 10, how they are interacting with the environment around them is going to be the first thing that I look at. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge piece. It's either, how do we take this and make it slower for you to be able to have time to disperse force up your chain, or how do we make this as efficient of a stop as possible? Because I think that, just like Rufus said, I think that has such a huge play into how we reaccelerate. We all know that like sports don't happen in these little windows of, okay, we stop on a deceleration, now he's just going to stand around there for the next 5 minutes until something happens again. It's constantly, and there are different levels to it, but it's a constantly, sports are stop and go. Like we should be kind of hitting a decel and then right back into a reacceleration. And so I think that it's important to bridge that gap well for people, because then we're able to be more efficient. We're able to reduce the number of steps that they take. We're able to conserve energy. Hopefully in the weight room, we're raising their ceiling, I guess their floor for force production, so that all of this stuff is just going to be a little bit more fluid than it was before.
You think that, I always wondered about this. So many, they say so many girls have knee injuries, and a lot of them are non-contact. You think it's because they don't work on the acceleration phase? It seems like the girls have a harder time, a lot of times stopping, or changing direction or decelerating is what I'm trying to say.
Right. I think that a lot of the time they're spending, I think they're spending so much time now. I think that that the research is kind of caught up with all of this. People are spending a lot of time with female athletes worried about how they land, and they're not adding the subsequent step to that, which is 9 times out of 10, it's how they land and then how they go back up. And so if we're landing and we have to use a ton of IR, everybody's seen this, like this is not new. If we're landing and we're having to go into a ton of IR, so that your typical knee valgus, and then we have to produce force back out of the ground like that, which if we can all agree that's like another IR moment, and we don't have any more IR to go into, what are we pushing through to get back off the ground? We're so concerned with how they land and how they absorb force, which generally the female athletes that I work with are already pretty good at landing and absorbing force on the ground. They're already being pulled down all the time. They don't have a basement for that, so they don't have any ability to stop themselves at an efficient height. They typically don't have the elastic component that they need to get back off the ground without just pushing through it. And if there's no more room for your, like, just looking at it in really basic lens, if there's no more room for your knees to go together by the time that you've stopped yourself going down, how are you going to push back up out of that? They're going to try. It's probably not going to look good. So yeah, I think we're probably spending too much time just looking at the landings because that's what we think the issue is, and it's a big part of it, right? It's the movement right up before what I'm talking about. But if they're able to have some kind of force production strategy, and that requires a lot of stuff on the back end too, but if they're able to have that, then okay, maybe that landing becomes more efficient. Maybe they start pushing earlier. Maybe that runway for force production shortens a little bit. And so now we're looking at, them using kind of the physics to their advantage rather than just trying to muscle through everything, which I think a lot of the times is what causing, the issues that we're seeing.
So you're saying they're getting hurt more on the reacceleration than necessarily on the deceleration?
Yeah, I think that if they're trying, I think they know, like maybe not consciously know. I think they know when their feet hit the ground, let's say from a jump, and we're trying to get back up. If their feet are hitting the ground from the jump, they know there's a subsequent jump movement coming after that, and you are preemptively starting to push before you've even distributed load in the first place. So then we're looking at, there's kind of this predictive element to that then that says, okay, we're already pushing before we've stopped. So where is this going? Like, where is this coming from? And if they don't have kind of that stretch shortening or the ability to use, like a lot of them, if you look at Bill's stuff, like a lot of them can probably get some kind of yielding action. If they don't have the overcoming action though, the amount of elastic energy that's built up in the connective tissue for that just goes to waste. It's not going anywhere. So now all you've done is you've made the connective tissue longer, but you have no ability to kind of snap back and use the energy that's been created there. And so what are you using to get back off the ground? It's muscles that are pulling on connective tissue that's already in a lengthened position. That seems to me like the clearest kind of answer to this. And obviously, research is 2 years behind where we're at. So I don't know what it also, who's to say kind of how legitimate some of that research is anyways, because they're looking at very small things. But so I don't know the exact causation of a lot of that stuff, but I have a feeling that's a good starting place at least.
That makes a lot of sense. Go ahead,
Erik,
Corey.
what are some ways you're measuring either subjectively or objectively how well someone's improving their ability to decelerate and then reaccelerate?
Right. I think one of the biggest ways, like from a subjective standpoint, I listen and I watch a lot. Like if I've got them I do like a lot of these rocker seated box jumps. So they'll sit on a box, they'll rock back so their feet are off the ground, and then I'll rock them forward again. So that they hit the ground, they have to create really quick ground contact and they have to get up to the box. There's a couple ways that I can look at that. I can say, okay, this ground contact was really, really quick based on a visual appearance, It sounded really, really quick, so they didn't sound like they dead hit the floor. There wasn't a ton of heel contact. So for a lot of those girls, I don't want them getting into that early phase of propulsion where they're going to dampen too much and not use the momentum from the rock onto the ground. So I want to keep them 4 foot, mid-foot to 4 foot on the ground contact really quick. And then looking past that, it's like, okay, now what's the box that we're getting up to? So how much, like how high are they able to get off the ground there for something like that? So, if we're talking about just getting up to a 12-inch box, but it looks really quick, now how do I build that forward to make sure we're getting up to a 20-inch box really quickly? So it's just time in each of those categories. And when things look good, and it's going to change day to day. So when things look good, let's make those steps forward on that day. Let's say, okay, now today is the day that we need to try out going to the next box, or today is the day we need to take the box that you're sitting to down a little bit so that you have, that much longer to push through. So it looks more like the depth of your counter movement versus, always keeping the box at a quarter depth of their counter movement and saying, okay, this is going to give you the least amount of momentum into that jump. Now let's add some momentum to that and see how you handle that kind of force into the ground before you reaccelerate. So there are a lot of ways to do that. Kind of the more objective side of that is obviously like tracking stuff with GymAware. So doing pogo jumps and seeing, kind of calculating what their rate of force production looks like, how long their ground contact time is, and then looking at those averages just as a trend over time. To be able to say, okay, force output went up, ground contact time went down, jump height went up. We're probably heading in the right direction here in terms of their ability to hit the ground, disperse force the right way, and then reaccelerate back off the ground. And so, with kind of the advances that technology has made in our industry in the last, 10 years, I guess, that stuff has been really, really helpful. But it can be as easy as just filming stuff in slow-mo on your iPhone and going back and looking at it and say, okay, this is where we were at month 1 and this is where we're at now. And regardless of any of the objective metrics that come out of this, it looks better. And they can probably feel that. A lot of the times I think that the athletes that I work with will come to me with, man, like I just felt really bouncy today, or I felt really, really good in my game the other day. My knees didn't hurt the same way that they did, before I started doing all this stuff. And so that sometimes for me is enough. I don't know that it's always, I think it's hard to sell people on the fact that there is a genetic ceiling for everything that they do. So while jump height might not have changed, their ability to interact with the ground on the landing changed. And that's a hard sell because people don't really care about, man, that landing looked great. Like college coaches aren't coming to, college scouts aren't going to games saying this guy stops really well. So it's not the sexy stuff, but that stuff matters in terms of keeping kids, on the court or on the field. And I think that gives them more opportunities down the line anyway. So there are a lot of ways to kind of measure that stuff.
I think that's a really interesting point because I think a lot of people love to talk about the objective side. But I mean, there's definitely an experience component to it, where as you see more things and get more reps and just have more of that coaching eye, you can start to delve into the more subjective. And so how do you feel like your both decision-making process and outcome process has changed as you've gotten more experience, as your coaching has improved, and as you have a better sense of kind of what you're looking at?
Right. I mean, it really does come down to reps. I think early on, you kind of want to fit everybody in the same box. It's kind of like reading, pick your credential company, their textbook, right? It's like, this is what a squat looks like. This is what, a hinge looks like. This is what, and the fact is, and that's why I kind of make that comment about research, is because who defines like what a squat is for each individual person? Like, it's not a textbook. Like, they give me general guidelines to say these are the qualities that you kind of need to look for, but progressing towards whatever the textbook says is not the goal at the end of the day. Like, I want somebody to have the best version of what they do. And that doesn't mean it needs to look like everybody else's. That doesn't mean they need to perform like everybody else. But where I've come now is, okay, these are the things that I need for this. Like, that's where KPIs kind of come into this, this is where, I need this to look like this, or this is the standard of this movement for you. So here's what we need to do. And that's why now, if I have a lot of kids coming in the evenings right now, they will do their reset exercises, whatever those are. And sometimes those are more dynamic than you would imagine that they are. But sometimes they come in, they do those reset exercises, and I measure them on the table beforehand, whatever KPIs that I've established. And it doesn't have to be table measures, but whatever we've done, we check in on those things before the exercise or before the workout, and we check on those things at the end of the workout to make sure that we're making progress in the right direction. If they've gotten worse at any of those KPIs during the time that I have them, there needs to be an evaluation of what I did that day with them. And so it's not just checking off the box in terms of like the success we made, but making sure that I'm reevaluating, the successes and failures of that day for them. So what things worked and what things didn't work. And that's a big deal, because that's how we're going to kind of get the most out of each session with them. So yeah.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah.
Like
so
athletes?
I work with a lot of pitchers right now. And so because they're about to start their kind of summer ball circuit, I think there's kind of this, Corey, you can kind of correct me on this. I don't know what the textbook measure of, let's say, like shoulder IR is. I think it's like 60 or something like that. I don't even know what it is.
Like, yeah, 70 to 90.
70 to
average
90
ballpark.
For some of the pitchers that I work with, 40 might work, right? Like 40 might give me exactly what I need. And so if I have combined kind of my testing with their results on the field, then I can establish a range that's going to say, okay, this is where we need to be at. This is where you throw the best. This is where you feel the best. This is where you recover the best. And so this is the range that we need to look at, because I've taken all those measurements so frequently with them. So I can kind of keep track of that stuff, and it changes. Like there's obviously a lot more to it than that, because it goes into, the variables that I don't control. So how much sleep they're getting and all that other stuff. But if I can be at least somewhat consistent with the way that I measure and the way that I keep track of that stuff, and I know that there's a window there, then I can keep in that. So I have a pitcher right now that I say, okay, if they come in and they're at 20 that day, I'm like, okay, I've got to make sure that restoring that is a bit more of a focus for me today, because they're going to throw a bullpen tomorrow, and then they're going to have a day off, and they're going to throw in a game. So I have to try to get them closer to that number. And if we measure afterwards and we are closer, at least if we made progress towards that, I know that we're probably on the right track. I know that I don't have enough time typically in a session, jumping back and forth between athletes, to just sit there and, prescribe new resets or whatever it is. But if I get them closer to that, I know that we're at least on the right page. And so if we're within a window, it's never going to be an exact science, but I know that we'll be close, and that they'll perform at least at the level that they want to perform at. So
how do you narrow in on what KPIs are going to be relevant for each individual athlete?
Good question. It's a combination a lot of times of their goals and then the things, like if you're looking at a chessboard, the things that really stand out as being an issue. And so if we use pitchers for an example, a lot of times if they're a right-hander, I will see, really, really limited hip IR. I'll see really, really limited shoulder IR on like say the right side, for example. And so those things, if there's nothing else, usually they have some level of soreness. So we'll talk about, elbow and soreness or shoulder soreness that they have, and making sure that I take care of those things to keep them like asymptomatic for the most part. But once we're looking at, a healthy, relatively well, someone that moves well, it's about, keeping track of those things for them going forward. So it's really more of a, measure them, see what stands out, see what we make changes with immediately, or what's really, really variable about them. And then seeing how, and those KPIs probably change quite a bit, because, based on how quickly their bodies learn something, I might be able to move past something, and then we just rekey on it in the program. So I might not ever have to make a measurement like that again, as long as I know kind of globally what's going on with their bodies. So it's really, really variable from person to person, kind of what I decide is going to be the most important things to measure that day for them.
Do you ever use more dynamic activities like a squat or a split squat as your KPIs, especially as you get more data on athletes and get to know them more?
For sure. Yeah, that's again, that comes back to me not saying much during their sets or not trying to make it look like something that it probably is not going to be that day. So that's a real big assessment piece for me while they're training, is to say, okay, this is like, I typically have a pretty good memory of what things look like for them. So these are the constraints that we used last time we did a split squat. We're using the same constraints now. We're using the same load now because I've already kept track of that on their program for that day. Why does it look different to me today? And then being able to kind of relay that back to the things that I've noticed in their previous history, and then just the conversations that we have. So, yeah, I had a hard practice today. That's, likely that's probably why they're diverting to whatever movement pattern that they're diverting to, because if they're already fatigued, if they're already stressed out, if they've already got all this other stuff going on, kind of the path of least resistance is going to be what they divert to in that situation. So if I've established that early on in the assessment process, then that makes it easy. I know kind of what that's going to look like for them that day, and we can make some changes to it. So yeah, the most of my assessment, like the vast majority of it, is while they're training, for sure.
Awesome. Anything you want to follow up with, Rufus?
No, just keep going. That's really good.
Cool. So let's go in a little bit of a different direction here. Kind of alluded to it earlier, but everyone's going to have their own sort of normal of what they think should look like, just based on how they are structurally and like who they are as athletes. And so can you just dive into a little bit, don't have to go into too much detail, of how structure is going to influence someone's ability to move and how they're going to look, especially in more of your like change of direction type activities?
Right. Yeah, that's a huge thing, because I think that a lot of sport coaches want them to fit into these little, I guess, like sport-based bubbles, essentially. Like basketball players, we all know, for the most part, especially if you're looking at a certain level, they're all going to be shaped very similarly, but there are kind of these subtle differences from person to person. So if we're looking at like ISA or infrasternal angle measures, my narrower measures, so generally my taller, skinnier kids are going to interact with the ground a lot differently than, maybe some of my wrestlers or some of like my powerlifting type kids would look, because they're a little bit shorter, they're a little bit wider in terms of an ISA. And so there's something that they move along from, and this is a completely different story that I don't want to get into, but from like an embryological standpoint, they developed along a helical angle. So from the time that they were, a developing embryo, there is a helical angle associated with different shapes of people. And so my taller, skinnier tubes have a steeper helical angle. And so when they go to put a foot down and make a cut, their step is usually narrower, so they kind of disperse force like this versus like a longer, wider cut. So I'll put my foot out. I did a good example of this, me versus Dave that works in the morning. Dave's 6'9" and Dave is super narrow. I'm 6'2" and I'm super wide. And so when I put a foot out to do a change of direction, my feet are very wide. I make a really flat turn, so my chest turns to the side much more than Dave's does. And then, that push comes a little bit more naturally for me out of the cut because I've created such a sharp angle. For Dave, he creates a much narrower angle. So his athletic stance, whatever you want to call that, is a little bit narrower from a base standpoint. He has a lot more of a vertical turn. So his chest will like fall towards the ground, where mine just kind of turns towards the lead leg. And so because he set himself up with a narrow base, his subsequent push out of that change of direction is usually a less effective step in a lot of cases, at least from the observations that I've made. So, and that's not just Dave. This is in general. I don't want to say, it's funny because Dave actually plays tennis, and which is a really change of direction heavy sport. But he makes up for his lack of kind of this wider base with his rotational abilities that I don't have. And so he's kind of able to cheat the system a little bit on that in terms of being able to get to a backhand a little bit more efficiently, where I would have to make this huge turn, probably with multiple steps for me to get in the same position. He can rotate there in one step and be able to keep a narrow base and do all that stuff. So the kind of arbitrary get your hips down, get your chest up stuff that you will hear from a lot of sport coaches, frankly, doesn't work for everybody. You know, a lot of times if you let somebody do something, and Lee Taft is great with this, so like just letting them do what is natural to them will kind of show you that helical angle that they should be on, and so or that they'll divert to, I guess. And so not trying to take them out of that, but trying to let that be, like trying to make that the most efficient kind of position possible for them to use is kind of the goal. So I train everybody on that helical angle, and it varies person to person, right? Like like someone who has more variability in their ISA, someone who's able to go through more of an excursion in terms of an inhale and an exhale, will have more variability in their plant angle and change of direction. Somebody who is really, really locked into a position, so you know, someone with an exhaled rib cage position, or I guess I have an inhaled rib cage position, but an exhaled axial skeleton. So someone with an inhaled rib position like me, who doesn't have a lot of variability to close that ISA down, that angle, I'm going to be pretty reliant on that angle to get me out of a tough situation, especially when my focus is elsewhere. Where if I have a little bit of more control of how my rib cage moves and how my pelvis moves, then I can be off center. I can be, you know, I can make a mistake in the way that I'm moving, and I can kind of course correct out of that mistake a little bit easier. So that's where, you know, some of the more breath heavy stuff that we do really has an impact on, you know, if I'm able to help somebody's, you know, rib cage and pelvis move in the right ways when they take an inhale and exhale, and not have them be so stuck in a position, it can have a big effect on how they perform and change of direction stuff. And a lot of people don't make that correlation, because it's like, okay, this is quick movement that's happening. These are really slow movements that are happening. So there's not a lot of overlap there. And there's actually a lot more overlap than I think people would give that credit for. So yeah, being able to the situations, I can't ever replicate exactly what's going to happen in a sport in the weight room or on the turf side of the gym. So giving them options in a controlled environment, and kind of hoping that they make the right corrections as we go, and having things be more reactive as we get into that kind of work, kind of shows me what their abilities are going to be in terms of variability. And I have to kind of hone on those things all the time.
Is that something that's changeable? I mean, maybe not for you and Tall Dave, but say you have two kids like you two guys are, and you know the exact same thing. Is that something that where we could get you to rotate better or quicker or however? Is that something at a young age, because you're so much more plastic? Would that be something to be changeable?
My impression is yes. My impression, and I would say that's regardless of age in a lot of respects, because there's still, I mean, you guys know as you get older, there's less kind of fluid in your bone structure. So that becomes a different thing, and that becomes a little bit harder to change as time goes on. But when you have somebody really pliable, now I'm never going to change a physical shape of somebody. Like,
right.
There's a lot of genetic component to that I can't change. I truly believe that we can have a big impact on how dynamic that helical angle is for them. And I think that that's something that for sure can change. I've seen that change. And, you know, I've been here long enough now that I've kind of had these long-term success stories with, you know, someone who might have been stuck in a really, really wide helical angle before, being a little bit more dynamic and being able to make those smaller step changes than they were before. And so I think that along the same lines, on the flip side of that, I've had very narrow people. That's the majority of the athletes that I work with are narrows. And so having them be able to get a wider base, make a more efficient plant angle to push off of, and be able to use physics in their advantage, has probably really stemmed from my ability to kind of increase that dynamic ISA.
let's build this out, because I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of people to be able to understand why you're looking at these things, like just from a structure perspective, and how that relates to like how you're making coaching decisions. And so just at like the one of the more basic levels, why is being able to have dissociation at your pelvis and having ribcage mobility going to be important in terms of your change of direction activities?
Right. So if you look, like, let's break it down in like there's a lot of sports science phases, or like kind of what they'll name things that go into, I guess you can break down into gait or whatever you want to look at, but there's always this like kind of moment when your foot in change of direction hits the ground and you start to load that leg, and there are certain kind of characteristics that go along with that are going to tell me if that foot's going to hit the ground really, really heavy, or if it's going to hit the ground and be a little softer and be able to absorb the force that goes up the chain. And so if I'm somebody, and I am somebody who is really rigid, I carry a little bit more of the concentric force production side than I do kind of the fluidity of movement side of things. But if they're able to make that step and not use kind of muscular compression based strategy to disperse force, it's going to allow that wave of momentum from the ground to kind of travel up their chain, and it's going to allow them to disperse that force, hopefully make a yielding action at the connective tissue to store some energy, and then use my superpower in a way that's going to be advantageous to me outside of the cut. If I don't have that ability on the way into a cut to disperse force, to kind of load the connective tissues, if I'm a rigid kind of like rod of muscle and bone when I hit the ground, where am I going to go? Like, my momentum is going to carry over that foot. So I have to create a wider base regardless, because if I create a narrow base, 9 times out of 10, my center of mass is going to carry over the leg that's supposed to plant in the ground and keep me from going in that direction. And so if I'm able to use that wide base to my advantage and put the foot in the ground and actually disperse force, use the energy that's absorbed in the tissue and redirect that in the opposite direction, that to me is going to be the most efficient use of my superpower. On the flip side of that, for somebody like Dave, or any of I work with a ton of volleyball players. So any of the volleyball players that I work with, for the most part, narrows, low force production, really, really kind of held down by gravity in a lot of senses. And so if I can get them, if they're able to have more of an inhaled axial skeletal position, more of an inhaled rib cage position, maybe that changes their foot relationship with the ground. So maybe instead of them being too soft on that foot contact, being too kind of accepting of the force and too sinking into the ground on that, if we're able to create some rigidity kind of predictively, because they know the foot's going to go into the ground, then maybe I disperse enough that it becomes efficient. I can store enough store enough energy in the connective tissue, and I can use that kind of physics-based energy storage to help me rebound out of a cut like that. And so having, like, not being married or stuck in one position is generally useful for sport. I think there are certain things, right? Like, how much force acceptance do I want when I'm going to max back squat? Probably not a ton. I want to be able to give enough to get to parallel, and then I want to be able to use all of that to get back up. So all of the compression, all the strategies that I would generally use in change of direction stuff, I need to be able to use on a heavy back squat. When the goal isn't just to stand back up with the weight, when the goal is to be able to make all of these other little adjustments on the fly, you can't really treat something like this big, heavy, slow global movement pattern. There are so many things happening at the same time. So I think that if I'm able to, if we look at it like a spectrum between kind of that narrow and that wide ISA, maybe middle ground isn't what I'm looking for with everybody. And it could be with some people. Maybe just shifting them from the extreme more towards the middle is going to give me enough of the variability that I'm looking for them to still be successful, and for them to still use whatever, that superpower is that their shape provides them. if I take them too far the other direction, what I'm looking at is now somebody who can't use that superpower and is stuck too far the other way. And so that's where, like our last conversation about measuring and remeasuring and making sure that we're taking, either a mental or a physical note of all these things becomes so important, because as soon as performance starts to dip, that's where my job kind of is on the line with the people that I work with. They don't want to see, a lot of people that come in are married to the numbers of, okay, I want my vertical jump to go up higher. If their vertical jump doesn't go up higher, and I've also made them subjectively and objectively slower, and I've also made them, weaker, or whatever weight room metrics we're looking at, probably not going to hang around for very long with me if I'm making them a worse athlete. But they move better. You know what I'm saying? Like, their movement variability is great now. I lay them on the table and everything looks normal. That might not be the goal, because at the end of the day, if I'm taking away what makes them good at their sport and not providing them with the benefit of the training that they're doing, then what's the point? Like, I don't need everybody just to move like everybody else.
Yeah, and so you mentioned that you use some table tests to determine how much variability someone has within their axial skeleton, which is going to give you some more leeway in terms of how they may go through their like speed type activities. Say you don't have access to a table, or it's not really like your shtick or whatever you want to call it. What are some more dynamic tests you use to determine kind of where someone's at and how much variability or dynamic capabilities they're going to have once you get them out on the turf and see them move around?
Right. If we're looking at just like eye test stuff, again, this is a huge component of this is just reps with people who I could almost fit in similar buckets. So I think I'm at the point now, and everybody's going to be at a different level that listens to this, but start trying mentally to like categorize people in a way that makes sense to you. So generally athletes drift into sports that they're going to be successful at, especially at the level that, like, once we get into high school now, everything's becoming really specialized. And so if you're looking at, a high school volleyball player, most of the girls that I work with are in similar buckets if I was going to categorize them in a way like that. And so now it becomes, what have I had success for with someone who looked a lot like this before? And then how am I going to gauge success with this person as an individual? So that doesn't mean they get put on the same plan, on the same programming that other person got put on, because hopefully I'm able to, not every girl that comes in with volleyball has the same goals. Not every girl looks the same or has the same history. So there are going to be subtle changes that need to happen with that. But how do I make, how have I had success with what they, like this type of person before? And then what am I looking at now? And kind of how do they respond to the things that I asked them to do with that kind of lens put on it? So if we're looking at like actual stuff that I would see on the floor, like, where do I start them? If I want to start on a box squat and I want to see how quickly they're able to come out off of a box that's set at a third of their squat depth, like in total, I'm taking them more towards the compressive stage as I take them down in depth. So we're getting into, let's say we're at 60 degrees of hip flexion there. I'm starting to take them into a range that would become more compressive. So how do they handle that? How quickly are they able to come up off the box? What kind of load do I have them on? A lot of this is like an eye test from a jump standpoint. So like, what's happening on the way down and on the way up of a squat that's slower that I would see being an issue once we're getting dynamic and this turns into a jump. So a lot of this is just so based on what they're like, how they present when they walk in. What have I had experience with before in this? And then how do we kind of progress this in the right way that they're going to see success as quickly as possible? I think I answered that. I don't really know for sure. If I didn't, you can tell me.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you're looking at kind of like structurally what they look like. And then based on that, you have a little bit of a category. Then you start to look at their movement and say, hey, I've seen similar athletes who look like this. And then when they do like this box jump, they also have this quality. And then when they do a split squat, they have the same kind of tendencies. And you just start to build up these kind of categories. And then based on the categories, it gives you an idea of where to go. in terms of your training.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just enough reps with the same type of people or the same experience, with similar looking people to go over time and say, I've had success with this. This will likely, given all the variables that I know that I have influence over, something like this will work. And now how do I tweak it to make it the most effective for that person? So everybody responds differently in the weight room, and that's great. Everybody responds differently when I have them do turf stuff. And so it's just me learning a little bit about who they are and how they move that's going to help me make the best decision for them going forward. And regardless of, I didn't do table tests early on at all, and I think I still had success because I was able to make enough kind of educated decisions on the fly to say that didn't look like how I wanted it to look in my head, because I've seen other people do it and it looked like this, and I was really happy with the way that looked. And so if people don't have access, or that's not their thing, or they're not comfortable doing that type of thing, make sure you're watching what they're doing. Make sure you're always keeping kind of a mental, again, exercises are not these black and white dictionary definitions of what people want you to think that they are in a cookie cutter type of environment. Keep a mental note of what, like, your model of movement for each individual person, understanding where they've been, understanding what you've taken them through already to that point, and say, okay, this will probably be successful. And that overlaps a lot of exercises. I know that for the most part, that some of the people that I work with that are, maybe spend a little bit too much time pushing an IR, I know that having speed on the movement is going to be something that I have that repeats as a theme in their entire program. I might not have anything that they do that is like low and slow. I might have a lot of the stuff that they do be really high, velocity focused med ball stuff, whatever that is, just so we can make sure that there's a really similar theme that's going to benefit them down the line.
Yeah, and that could be applied to any system you use. Like, you have your way of doing things, but as long as you have a system, an idea of what things should look like and what your intent is, you can start to, again, bucket people. And then as long as the intent matches the execution outcome, then you're kind of know you're heading in the right direction.
For sure. I think that's where a lot of people in our industry kind of lose their way, is like just prescribing exercises for the purpose of filling time or filling parts of a program. And like, if you can't explain the intent in a way that's contextual for whoever you're working with, they're going to wonder why they're doing that thing. Like, I have a lot of athletes. So we have like these web forms that they fill out when they get a new program. And a lot of the times they don't ever say anything on their web forms. So like, it'll ask them like, what movements did you like? What movements did you not like? And generally they don't say anything because they trust that I'm making the best decision for them. And so they know that if I've helped them get better in X, Y, or Z, that I'm going to make a informed decision for them going forward. So they might not enjoy the exercise that I have them doing. A lot of the kids that I work with don't love doing, a split stance cable row. It does not the sexiest thing that we do in the gym, but if I can explain it to them that in a way that's contextual for them and that's individualized for them, then they probably are going to do it, and they're going to take it seriously, at least.
So how often are you tracking in terms of KPIs or just like your eye tests, how movement looks, and ensuring that whatever you're doing to develop that is working, basically?
Daily. I mean, it is literally an everyday thing. I think that there's not, I do physical notes. Like, I have 2 binders in my office that are very clearly laid out with every athlete that I work with, their name, and there's a notes section. That's something that I actually picked up from Ty, was just like the amount of notes that he took on the people that he worked with, to make sure that he was kind of giving a synopsis for the day of their experience in the gym and kind of what they came in with and what they left looking like. I do the same thing. And so making sure that I'm keeping track of all of that stuff on a daily basis, whether it is as intentional as laying them down on the table, or, looking at their program. Last week on a Zercher squat, they did 135. I felt like it had really good speed, like for the first 2 inches out of the bottom for them. this week, I do not like the speed on this exercise. And it's the same weight. We're doing the same execution. The tempo is the same. The reps are the same. The sets are the same. So like, what is it this week that I'm not getting that I was getting last week? And then kind of making sure that I am talking to that person about what they've done outside of the gym, how they're feeling that day. Kids are really, really, I think that once they trust me, they're very, very honest about what they've got going on outside. And so, how did that set feel? Making sure that they know the intent of the exercise also is something that from, between sets, I always make an emphasis of, because this is where our interns struggle a lot of times, because they have an idea of what I'm trying to go for with an exercise. And so if I, leave them alone with an athlete, I'll come back and it doesn't look right to me. And it's because they don't know my focus on certain things, and I know what I wrote that exercise for and what I'm looking for on that. And so if I'm able to explain that to them, and then the athlete knows the intent of what I'm trying to do, like if all I'm worried about, a lot of the kids are married to weight, right? They're like, I want to do as much as I can on this exercise. And I'm like, what about how fast you're going? So that's where the gym aware helps in a lot of situations, because they get that feedback from it. The thing I don't love about that sometimes is that when the intent drives the execution either positively or negatively too far in one direction. If all you're going for is velocity, you can make something look terrible and still achieve the kind of velocity goal that you're looking for. But as long as they know this is what this is supposed to look like, that's where demonstrations come into a big piece too. Like that helps me not say something, because if I know what I'm looking for, I'll do it in the way that I want them to do it. So yeah, that stuff is really done day to day. It's done set to set. Like most of the people that I work with, the exercises, they might have, if you look at their entire day's workout, 8 to 10 movements that they're doing. Like, and they kind of range from being, the top level dynamic, reactive, whatever you want to call that, down the list. And everything's got a purpose to it. And everything's got something that it should be feeding forward or feeding back on, in terms of what I'm looking for. And so as long as they have some understanding without over explaining to them what the emphasis is, then I think we're good.
I like it. Rufus, anything you want to follow up?
No, because I don't want to go off topic. So go ahead. When you stop with a topic, then I'll ask my question. But
well, I just want to come back to a point you made earlier, because I think it's an important concept to highlight. So when you're comparing you versus Dave, you mentioned that you were able to get a wider plant angle and probably a stronger push out of that cut. But when Dave plays tennis, he can make up for that by being able to rotate better. So can you explain the difference between those two things and why both would be important in terms of being just a good overall kind of mover athlete?
For sure. So if we go back to kind of like that cylinder example, Dave is, a taller, if people are watching this, like Dave is a taller, skinnier water ball, and Rufus has his water ball, and Rufus's water ball is a little shorter and a little fatter than mine is. And so I'm probably more along that shape. Even though
he's talking about the water bottle, Rufus, not you.
oh, okay.
Yeah, no, yeah, your water ball, not you. So because Dave is so cylindrical in shape, a lot of times that lends itself towards, at least from an outward extremity appearance, him being able to turn really well. So if you think, he is more of a cylindrical shape, he's going to rotate on that cylinder a little bit better. I am much flatter if you look at me anterior to posterior. So, my lower ribs stick out pretty far. My back is, my scaps pretty much touch each other all the time. So I'm being shoved forward, being compressed from behind, which means that likely I will probably beat Dave in a 100-meter sprint. But if something has multiple changes of direction in it, multiple, decels and reaccelerations in it, Dave is probably going to edge me out on a lot of that stuff if it's condensed, because he can make those transitions in a lot shorter time and with a lot less kind of mechanical disadvantage than I have to make those kind of turns. Like when I make a turn, it is a really, really flat turn. I have to let my hips kick back because that's the only way that I can absorb force the right way, where Dave can kind of make this smooth up and down transition. So he has a lot more vertical displacement when he makes a change of direction, and I have a lot more of a horizontal displacement when I make a change of direction. So I don't absorb quickly or very efficiently if I'm really moving through something with speed and with intent to it. Where Dave kind of has this fluid angle that he gets into. He might not get down very low on certain things, but he's able to push out. He probably projects up more than I do. I probably project out more than he does. So you can kind of think of Dave as being this. I mean, I don't want to use the kangaroo gorilla analysis because I feel like, or analogy, because I feel like that's been done quite a bit. But he is more long duration, low amplitude. I am more short duration, kind of high amplitude on something like that. So I won't outlast Dave in a quarter mile probably, but I can probably beat him in 100 meters and use that opportunity, that window of force production to be the most efficient during that time. But when it comes to making turns, when it comes to keeping things like think about in tennis how long a volley might last for a while and something like that. Like Dave can make those repetitive turns over and over and over again, where my serve might be killer because I can put a lot on it, but I don't have a lot of options to move back and forth after that. So, what sports are going to be the things that are going to that my body is going to respond to the best? And this is true of, all the athletes that I work with. They generally find the thing that they're going to be the best at because they'll enjoy the things that they're successful at in the long run. So, my athletic career was football and basketball and baseball and track. So yeah, sure, baseball is considered a rotational sport in a lot of kind of coaching windows. I could get enough done to be successful in some of that stuff, but straight line stuff is where it's at for me. Where Dave was a better baseball player than I was probably in a lot of respects, and could do more of this change of direction work and play tennis, could probably kill me in cross country any day. And so, yeah, those are the benefits of a shape. Going back to Rufus's question earlier, I don't know that I can ever change that stuff. I think that I can get them closer to whatever their genetic potential is to be successful at X, Y, or Z. I don't know that I can make them more, make their positions more advantageous than somebody who is already set up in an axioskeletal position that's going to make them better in those certain things. I'm not going to play in the NBA. There are guys who are better shaped to play in the NBA than me. And that's a fact. It doesn't matter how hard I work at that. It doesn't matter how many years I would spend, trying to gear myself towards something like that. I'm not structurally built for something like that. That's unfortunate. That's a hard conversation to have with people. I think that's why we probably avoid that conversation a lot in our industry.
So is Dave's abilities, that's the word I'm looking for, could it also be more of an adaptation because of the sport he chose?
Could be, but I think baseline he was in a. I think if you look at it from like a bird's eye view, he was probably predisposed to have a slight advantage of that sport. Like Dave's not a professional tennis player, but right. he will likely, okay, say we start at the same place. We start training on the same day. We're both 12 years old in tennis. We start with the same baseline experience in tennis. I think Dave makes jumps quicker. I think Dave makes the transitions better. I think Dave has more early success in that activity than I would, given the same experience level leading up to that point. So I think that my interest in that sport probably dies off, and Dave's interest in that sport probably grows exponentially because he's seen success in it, and he's spent less time doing it and gotten more benefit out of doing it. And so at the end of the day, my interest in it probably dwindles after a while, And so I stopped trying to do stuff like that. I started doing things that I know that I'm going to be good at, or things that I see success in. So, I mean, it's like, why do kids get into like non-revenue sports? Like, why would you do that? It's probably because they're good at it. Like if you enjoy doing something and you're good at it, like you're gonna get into it.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, short term Dave is better, but what about the long term? Could you, if you stayed in it, could you come up equal to him or possibly even surpass him? I know it has a lot to do with genetics and body type and all those kinds of things, but what I'm saying is, would it have allowed you to rotate or whatever Dave's better qualities are better than what you ended up being able to do?
Potentially. Yeah. I think that realistically, if I was hell bent on being the best at this sport, and that's where I think that's what sets a lot of high level professional athletes apart from everybody else, is that maybe it has a little bit to do with their shape, maybe it has a little bit to do with their structure and with their their abilities kind of in and outside of the weight room athletically. But I think that if you are doing the right things and you're at least keeping the focus, like from my standpoint in programming, if I'm keeping the focus on the things that we need to constantly be addressing to make sure that they're as successful as they can be, I think that there's probably a chance that you can kind of out train your genetic potential in a lot of ways. I think that we see that a lot. Like we see guys who are successful in sports and we're like how? Like how is that? How is this person doing that type of thing when we've seen other people who might look the part better and they're not as successful. So who knows? I mean, like team sports are different because like Steph Curry doesn't have to drive the lane and dunk. Like Steph Curry and LeBron James are different people, altogether. They don't play the same game, but both are really, really high level at what they do. And I think that's probably because they tweaked the sport in a team sport environment to their advantage. Like Steph Curry was like, look, I'm not going to drive the lane and dunk. I'm not going to I'm not going to be more physical than these other players. Let me shoot the ball from 35 feet every chance that I get it and just be really good at that. So we have to gauge success in those things at different levels. Like if I was able to use my angles, my wider angles better than Dave was, quicker than Dave was, be a little bit more responsive when I hit the ground, be a little bit more fluid when I go into a cut, but maintain my level of force output, give myself as much rotation as my rib cage is able to handle, make my scaps articulate with my rib cage on the backside a little bit better, provide whatever dynamic ISA I'm able to achieve. Yes, I think that I can learn to use my strengths better than someone who is probably just naturally shaped for that sport.
So to me, that's an argument for playing a lot of different sports and activities when you're younger. And I don't want to get off into that, but it just seems that being able to play tag and soccer, tennis, whatever it is, you're getting a multilateral exposure. I don't know if that's the right term, but to all that, and then now I'm able to do some of these things better than I may have if I'd only stuck to one or two sports.
Right.
I mean, would that be fair to say?
I think that's great. Yeah. I think that I've seen you do this a lot where you are able to make whatever you're doing that day in your programming, especially from an athletic development standpoint, or like a group class standpoint, you're able to make enough changes in the way that you're programming, the way that you're presenting something to somebody, to be like generalized so they don't get locked in the same movement qualities all the time in their training. So we don't get specialized at an early age in what they're doing. So that's, when you asked me earlier what their first program looks like, I've got a handful of kids. I think the youngest kids that I have right now, I have two 13-year-olds. And they are already starting to go down that specialization path. But I keep their movement window open. Like I want them to be exposed to a lot of stuff. I want them to be, if they're soccer players, I want them to not forget how to use their hands on a game or do all that stuff, because, I've trained one kid for close to a year now. And then he comes up to me and says, like, I want to try out for basketball next year. Yeah. And I'm like, well, thank God we've been doing stuff other than just soccer stuff for the last year and a half, because I think you'll be pretty good. Like the fact that they want to try stuff like that, I encourage that. I also don't want to say that anybody that specializes in is probably lacking or missing out on some stuff. I think there are ways that we can still provide that. I think that, we are getting sport coaches out there who hopefully are understanding, that the training doesn't have to look exactly like what they're doing on the field or on the court all the time. That you can have a little bit more fun with what they're doing. You don't have to put people in these narrow windows all the time, and only focus on, okay, today is a leg speed day because we want to be able to kick the ball further or whatever it is. Like they're getting a little bit more open with some of that stuff and understanding that in a lot of cases, until they are physically mature, general is probably better.
So I'm just thinking, with the different, I don't think that all these body types and things make as much difference when they're younger. Like Corey and I have talked about this, with the kids I coach, which are the grade school, middle school kids, I can cue them into a position. And it's a lot better than having to breathe them into a position. Right. So, and so, or I can try to cue them into a position. And so, just hearing you talk about this, it makes so much sense now. Okay, well, here's all these different kinds of exposures that you're exposed to where you have to do different things. Okay, now I got to turn like a tennis player. If I get involved in it, maybe I'm not going to be as good as Dave. Okay, but that's not the point. The point is that, I'm the basketball. I like basketball. Well, now maybe I can rotate a little bit better because I can rotate more like Dave. It's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to go off on that.
No, that was honestly, that's a great point. I think that you're right. It can be. I think that if you keep kids are pliable. It's like, if my puppy, if she hurts her leg, it's a pretty quick healing process. 10 years down the line, it probably isn't as quick of a healing process for her. So if you're able to give them as much exposure to as many things as you can while they're young and they're pliable, it helps them. Like hopefully, like if we're going to assume that their genetic position is going to be kind of solidified by the time that they're physically mature, let's try to make that as dynamic as possible while they're young, at least, right? Like I can make some assumptions about what they're going to look like when they're older, but I still don't want to put them in the box of that too early and say, like, this is how you're going to be. And so we might as well start training like this now.
Well, Erik, how do you approach the question of giving someone something they're already really good at versus giving them things that they're maybe not as good at in terms of helping them reach that potential?
Yeah. A lot of the times it comes down to, like, I'll have kids who ask me, why are we not, like, are we going to deadlift? Are we going to barbell deadlift? I'll get like that question quite a bit. And my answer has to be like, I don't know. Like, I don't know that that's ever, an exercise isn't the end goal for me with anybody that I work with. Like my job, unless they're a power lifter, is not to, it's like, okay, well, I got you to barbell deadlift off the ground, so we're good then. Like we can just do whatever now. that might not ever be the goal. And so I think that once they understand from a relationship standpoint that I'm trying to make the best decisions for them, and that they're not going to always be the same as everybody else in the room, that they start to come to terms with, like, this is the best. I don't like the terms exercise progressions or regressions. We're just on, I don't think there's ever this, like, we did A, now we got to do B, now we got to do C pathway for it, because that the end goal is not an exercise. I can't like reiterate that any other way. My goal is not for them to just be better lifters. My goal is for them to be better athletes, and for them to move better, and for them to be pain-free, and for them to be more resilient. And so if I can make these subtle changes along the line that change the exercise from a you know a kind of feeling perspective for them, from an execution perspective, from a goal perspective, then hopefully we're heading on the right way. And they understand that conversation pretty easily. If they make it, a couple of months with us, and they're satisfied with what they're getting, that conversation becomes easier and easier and easier, because then the expectation is that I will try to challenge them with the things that I'm giving them in a program standpoint. I want them to make mistakes. Like, the whole reason we do speed and agility stuff, and I expose them to high momentum, high force production, things with a lot of velocity, are because I want them to make mistakes in those environments and learn from them, and then solidify kind of the response that they have to that. Like, crap, I put my foot in the ground and I drifted way over that side, so I did not get a good push on the med ball, on this med ball put. They can hear it a lot of the times, like, that sounded bad, or they'll say that's not a good one. I get that a ton. And so if they know that, they make the correction right then, and then hopefully down the line they're not thinking about it when they're doing it. So again, going back to what I said really early on in this, if I don't have to give feedback on it, like, a lot of my kids now, they know, okay, that was a crap rep. Like, they know it didn't look good. They knew it didn't feel good. They can sense that kind of things. Even though they might not be the most athletic athletes, they know what efficiency, what force production, what velocity feels like. And so as long as they know the intent, and they know that they're here to make mistakes, I'm here to put them in situations that's gonna challenge them. I always say, like, if they get down on themselves, I'm like, what are you here for? If you're here for me to just give you things that you're good at, you can do that at home. Like, what you're good at. You can just make up a workout on your own. Like, you wouldn't need me at all. So if you're going to get frustrated with not being successful in everything, which I think is a big problem in the kids that I have now, and maybe that's an area problem, although I think that's probably not. Like, the kids are hard on themselves, and they want to be good at everything, and they think that they're the best, and a lot of the kids I have are the best in academics, and they're the best in their sports, and they're the best in this and that. And so when I set them up in something that they're not successful in, kind of reframing their mindset to treat it like a learning opportunity rather than treating it like a failure every time, is a big part of what I do. And then making sure that I'm encouraging, when they find success, and success comes in letter grades for me. If things, like, I'm not one to try to make everything look like an A+ every time. Like, if something looks like a D, and that day I'm able to bring it up to a B- or a C+, like, that might be success in that exercise in that day for me. And I think that they feel that, and they'll build on that next time, because, like, Jay used to talk to me about kind of the neural reward system that would happen with finding success in an exercise. And so if they feel something, and then I give them positive feedback from that, they typically remember that. They'll remember what that feeling felt like. It releases this little bit of dopamine, and they're able to say, okay, this is what a correct rep on this exercise is supposed to be. So next time we do it, I don't have to come back to that. They usually start off at a B+ or a C-, whatever it is, and they're able to build on that the next time. So it makes it pretty easy.
So that's one of the hardest things kids have to try to adapt to, is failing.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, I have to tell them all the time, I don't care if you fail. You'll get it right. Just give me the intensity, the effort I need, but you'll get it right, and you'll know it. A light bulb will go off all of a sudden.
Right.
They don't they don't deal with it very well.
What you said there is really important too, because when you said intensity, like that is probably what I have to coach the most in speed and agility work out of anything, like by far, because if they are thinking about it and they're trying to do exactly what I showed them in the demonstration, it's going to be slow. And I'm like, you have to not try to make this look exactly like I just did it or exactly like you think it's supposed to be. Like you have to go fast and be willing to make the mistake and learn from the mistake rather than trying to make things slow and drawn out just so you can be successful in the way that it looks. Like going game, there is something to be said about training, whether it's med balls or it's change of direction, whatever it is, with like game speed type intensity. You guys would be amazed, like the times that I'll coach like a shuffle or a crossover step into something, like into a med ball throw or into a put or whatever it is, and they will slow that step down to make it a harder push off their back foot rather than just letting the exercise be what it is. Make that shuffle game speed and drive the ball into the wall, however hard that shuffle takes them. But when they get into a game, they're going to, like, I need them to cover ground on that shuffle. Like, you're not doing 5 shuffles in a row in a basketball game if you're guarding somebody. You usually have 1 to 2 shuffles in a row, and you're either crossing over so you can get to a sprint, or you go into a sprint, or there's a change of direction already happening. So if I get them to just treat the stuff that we do on the turf side with the intensity that they would if they were in a game, that's a huge benefit. And they're probably going to make a mistake doing that then. So I'm able to kill a bunch of birds with fewer stones.
I think Ty taught me this, that he would show the drill and they would practice the drill and then we would put them in a game.
Yeah.
To up the intensity. So, if we're learning how to shuffle, okay, take your time, feel the load, get back, feel like push off. But when we play the game, you can't be thinking about that because you got to get to the other side.
Exactly.
So whatever we're playing.
Exactly. So what I've done with that is really similar. So I will, for the most part, I'll put them in like a static position that will like reinforce a feeling for me. So I'll put them, if we're talking about a shuffle, let's use a shuffle for example. I might put them in a athletic stance with a shoulder to the wall and have them like push a ball into the wall over like past one shoulder. So now they're loading the wall side leg. I might have them hang out in that position for 5 breaths. That way they're getting a static kind of sensory driven response to that position. They feel pronation on their foot. They feel their wall side big toe digging the ground. They're able to load that hip. It's for an extended period of time. You think like 5 breaths takes like 30 seconds to do at least. So they're spending time in that position, getting a sensation. The next step forward then is like the immediate next step is let's add some momentum to this, but keep it relatively controlled. So now we might do a med ball put where they're shifting their body weight away from the wall, holding for a second, and then driving the ball towards the wall. So they get that same sensation. They're in the same position for a little bit of time, and they're able to use it in a way that demonstrates velocity, but there's not all of these other steps involved in it. And the final would be opening that up to a game or opening up that to a reactive response to something. So now we might have that 3-cone ball drop that I love where they shuffle into a cone, I drop a ball, and they're able to make a transition to a sprint outside of it. So it's layering on, again, the variables that I control, the momentum, the way that the exercise is executed, so that they get a sensation, they're able to reproduce that sensation with a little bit of momentum or a little bit of like external intent with it, like with a med ball, and then they're able to be really dynamic and really responsive and try to use that same thing when they're not going to be able to feel that same sensation that they felt in the initial exercise. So I try to build things in kind of a tier like that for everybody.
Well, I think the feel piece is huge because a lot of times some athletes just don't come in with a vocabulary of like, this is what a really smooth shuffle or really smooth cut feels like. When you can create an environment for that to click with them, all of a sudden they're like, wow, like this feels great. Like I'm moving really well. I feel faster. And it just kind of, 1, it builds confidence, and 2, just gives them more of a model in their head of like, wow, this is what I'm capable of. And this is like what I should be striving for more often.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, this is something that gets overlooked a lot, but is so easy to do, is just to like set things up at the lowest like common denominator, and then from there in a way that is going to be supportive of whatever qualities you're looking for in that exercise. So find the position that they're struggling with, make them kind of own that position in a static way, start to build on it out from there, and then you get into, you know, adding momentum, adding load, adding, you know, reactive qualities to it, and build it out, because they will have context, like you said, that reaches all the way back to that first static exercise. And as long as they know what that foot position feels like, generally things are going to go well up the chain.
And then you can just keep your mouth shut when they're like, oh, does it look good? Or how did that look? And then they just, or you look at them and they're like, yeah, I kind of know this was a good rep, this was a bad rep. Because they could figure it out themselves.
I don't have to say it at all. Look, if they're playing wall ball and they're able to get to a shot that they weren't able to get to before, just from building out a quality like that, or I do a ball drop and I do I'm pretty consistent with the ball drop. So if I do a ball drop the same every time, and last week they couldn't get off their left foot to save their life and get to the ball drop, and now they're blowing by it and I have to back up to make the exercise like meet them where they're at that day, they know that. Like, things feel different. They pick up on that really quick. Like, I very rarely have a kid that comes in that I think, oh my God, like this is just, you know, not a good move, or doesn't understand how his body interacts with space. Even the kids that I know that have gone through growth spurts, like really recently, if you give them that context and stack things like that, it's easy, super easy. And I love, like you said, I love not saying anything. I love not having to give them a bunch of cues or like tell them. If they know it's a bad rep, they know it's a bad rep. If they know that they didn't get to the ball in time, if they know that they could have made that, you know, made that step more efficient, they know it.
Yeah. You just build it up and then it carries over to whatever they need to do, their practice games.
I'm huge on the fact that, like, I don't think I have to teach much in like my job right now. I just have to set up an environment for them to learn on their own. And that's my only job. I don't have to hand them any information. If I set up the exercise to benefit them, the constraints of that exercise should make them successful, hopefully. Like, obviously that doesn't happen every time, but it's you know, learning and making decisions based off of that.
Do you feel like it's taken you a while to get to that point?
So long. And I'm so probably there. Like, I still have times where I'll find myself using my fifth cue on an exercise that I wrote down and being like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I still trying to put them in this exercise when I could be doing 5 other things that are going to benefit them more quickly and meet them where they're at? And then I'm not spending time and like decreasing their self-confidence by like basically making them feel unsuccessful in the exercise that we're doing. Doesn't make sense. But yeah, it's like a constant process, because I think early on at IFAST, and this isn't anybody's fault, but like, it's easy to be nitpicky when you think that you know everything. Like, you think that you have an influence over every little thing that somebody's doing. And that just by saying a couple of words that you can make this change. And so you want people to feel like you're paying a lot of attention to what they're doing. You want people to feel like you're engaged in what they're doing. And there is benefit to that, right? But at the same time, I kind of want them to feel successful and get what they need to get out of the exercise more than I want for them to know how much I know about something. So I try not to say much. That's why this is fun, because I actually get to say stuff.
I think sometimes we overcoach. You know, I'm certainly guilty of that.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, you know, and you have to rein it back in. They got to feel it at some point.
Right. I've started trying to hold myself more accountable for the decisions that I make. Like, if I messed up and picked the wrong exercise, I make sure, regardless of the situation, that whoever I'm working with knows that I messed up and I picked the wrong exercise. That's just owning the fact that, like, I tried to make this thing work based on my ego, not based on what I need to get out of the exercise or based on what you're looking like. Like, this was just the wrong choice. It's not your fault. It's my fault that I tried to make this thing work for too long. And so as long as they know that, hopefully that they're responsive to the fact that I will try to be better in the future.
Well, at the same time, you don't want to be afraid to experiment and try things.
Right.
And there has to be a period of time where you kind of let it go, and then you look back and think, God, what a dumbass I was.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
For doing that. I can't tell how many times I can think back and think like that. But
I think it's hard when you don't have the experience or the reps to like know your probabilities are high to just let it go, because you want to make sure everything's perfect so you get whatever your desired outcome is. So like it's something I struggle with, where like I just haven't seen a lot of things, so I don't really know what's going to happen. So I feel like I need to like overcoach to make sure I'm in the best position possible, when it'd be better to just kind of let things go, see what happens, reevaluate, and then go from there.
Right. I think that's where like I think I grew through my kind of creative lens on a lot of exercises, and being able to make things for the person that I work with rather than like relying on my limited toolbox of things. I had to kind of throw out the idea that like these are the exercises that we stick with, and if I haven't vetted every movement in the entire world, I can't use it with a client right then, right now. And the fact is, as long as I'm being safe in the way that I'm presenting something, I can make up something on the fly that is maybe a little bit unconventional and probably still have success with it in the long run, because I have enough experience doing that, and I know that I'm setting up the exercise in a safe way, that this person needs this. This is my intent of whatever this exercise is. It's safe. We're not loading it very much, like whatever that is. And then saying, yeah, this might not be something that they've done before, but it's kind of a parallel of something else, and I'm able to make that connection rather than just kind of limiting myself to, okay, like here's a rear foot elevated split squat all the time, and hopefully we get better at it.
What you said earlier about the intent of the exercise, what your intent is, I think is really important. I know Bill used to do that to me all the time, and it drove me crazy. Or he'd say, he'd say, teach me this, and I'd teach it, and he'd say, well, how do you see that? Well, I don't know, dadgummit, I just see it, and then he'd make me explain it, and that I just gets so frustrated, because I just see it. I don't know how I see it. I just see it, right? But I think that you're exactly right. And what's the intent of the exercise, and then can you teach somebody else to see it like you see it?
Erik, how do you feel like being around the guys at IFAST has helped you kind of expedite this process, and what recommendations do you have to coaches who don't have access to just that environment all the time?
It's weird to think about where I'd be if I hadn't been fortunate enough to be here. I was a sophomore in college when I came to shadow Jay at IFAST for the first time. So I had made a bunch of switches in my academic career to that point. Hadn't really found anything that I liked or was successful in. It's kind of a different tangent, but I was literally about to flunk out of college. At that point, I had such bad grades. And so I took an exercise science 190 class. I enjoyed that enough that I thought that was probably what I wanted to switch my major to, although I didn't know what I was going to do in that. And so I talked to my academic advisor, and she recommended that I go down there. And so I visited, and even though Jay didn't work with necessarily like my ideal client at the time, I think I only wanted to work with athletes from a pretty early stage. Like the amount of care and the amount of attention that he paid, and how much I could tell that he cared about what he did, like not only to people, like in front of people and for their benefit while he was in the gym, but like the things that he did outside to like continue and further his education. And the way that he invested in me, even though I really provided no benefit at that time, meant a lot. And so like I left there saying, this is what I want to do. Like this is kind of where I want to be. And I've obviously had some steps in between, you know, then and when I started working here full time. But everybody at IFAST is just really good about driving, like it's in a competitive way, like driving you to be better. And so that even goes down to the interns that we bring in, you know, asking great questions and giving, like Dave and I, although we have a lot of similar ideologies, like he'll provide things in a way that I would have never thought of before, in a context that I don't have, because I only have the context of the people that I work with. I think that's what makes social media so dangerous, is because people will try to look at an exercise that I do and say, this, I could apply this to all these people that I work with. And I think maybe not. Like you don't have the same content, like you don't know why I came up with this. You don't know who I was looking at that made me want to make this exercise. I try to provide people with like some decision-making, like roadmaps to say, this is how you could alter this to maybe help somebody. But the people at IFAST, like I encourage my clients a lot to like go work with Dave on stuff that they might have an issue with, because I might be beating a dead horse. I might have tried everything in my power to get them better at something, and Dave has a different perspective that's going to immediately benefit them. There have been times when Bill has come out on the floor while I'm coaching somebody, and he's like, why don't you just do this to make that better? And I do it, and I'm like, I guess I needed a different eye on it. The questions that the interns ask are, I want them to ask questions, and it's selfish. It's so selfish of me to do that, because I'm only asking them to ask me questions so that they give me a different perspective on what I'm doing, because I don't see things the same way that they do. I don't have the same experiences. I don't have the same background they have. And so the fact that they like, I get more joy out of answering questions that they think are stupid, or like really inconsequential than anything else, because it really either challenges my belief about something, or makes me explain things in a different way, or makes me, you know, look outside of just, you know, my narrow lens of who I work with and my biases, you know, in terms of what I do. So I can't kind of overestimate the amount of impact that's had, because the people here just care about everything. Like if I ever have a question about somebody doing Olympic lift, like I have a guy that I can ask all those questions to, and he sees things that I won't ever see. Like there's a potential that I will never be able to see things through the same lens that Rufus sees things. And that comes from everybody that he has ever worked with doing that specific movement, right? Just the same that it's hard for me to explain things to interns sometimes, because they will never see things the same way that I see things. They'll never pick up on those same cues. And but how can they look at those things to be more like to fit into their model of the people that they work with, is kind of my goal with an internship process. So yeah, it's there's so many layers to the people that I've been with here. Like Ty's so good at explaining things in a simple way that makes you kind of like smack your forehead and say, well, like, why didn't I see it like that?
Yeah.
And then you ask Jason a question, and it's like, sometimes Jason would have a conversation with me, and I'd be like, I'm still 10 words behind what you're saying right now. Like I can't even mentally picture what you're talking about. And then, you know, Bill will oversimplify an answer, but then I ask him a follow-up question to it, and I'll get this rabbit hole of information that kind of changes my viewpoints on things. So just, it's crazy having that many people like in your corner that can give you such different responses to the same question is crazy. It's so cool. And it's nice because like we're not all bent on this is the way that we do things. Like when people come into IFAST, if they're going to we might have the same assessment process. They're going to get coached very, very differently depending on who they end up working with. And I think that the fact that we're able to do all of these different things and still have their best interests in mind and still kind of push each other forward and drive kind of where this industry is going right now is really, really cool.
I think it's not that they have necessarily a different perspective. I think you both go in the same direction, but sometimes you tell them something and they don't get it. Dave tells them something that's the same thing you've been telling them, and all of a sudden this light bulb goes off. Oh, now I get it. He comes back to you and say, "Guess what Dave showed me?
Right.
Well, I've been trying to get you to do this for 2 years. You know,
Right.
I've been telling the same thing."
Right.
And so, you know, that's one of the beauties I always found at IFAST is that y'all were going in the same direction. You know, you just may have done it a little bit different based on your personality, and there's enough of you there that somebody's going to figure out how to get it across to you.
Right.
And y'all don't have the ego to say, "Oh no, don't go talk to Dave. I'll do it. I'll figure it out. I'll fix it." You know,
Right.
That's stupid.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not gonna. The guy has a special need. I'm sending him up to you guys. I'm not gonna try to do it because that's not what I'm good at, right? You know, I coach a little kid, but if you want to get higher level, you need to go to IFAST, you know, and stuff. And you know, I don't have any shame in saying that. It's just I'm more interested in the beginning part and let you know you guys take over the more advanced type of things.
Right.
And you know, so I think that's a really good perspective what you said on that. Make sure you cut that out and post it. So that was great.